Hello and welcome back to True Faith, the Writer's Block. It's episode 4 this week. Once again, I'm your host, Daniel Wales. Tonight, I'm joined by Rob and Stephen, who we saw in episode 1, and Adam, who we met in episode 2. Lads, how are we all?
Good, thanks.
Thank you all. Just before we make a start, just a quick reminder once again that if you do want to be a part of True Faith, head to their Twitter and get in touch. Their Twitter handle is at TFNUFC. Okay, lads, our first topic tonight is the issue about who will score Newcastle's goals, with our main creative players, Callum Wilson, Miguel Almiron and Alan Saint-Maximin, out at the moment with injuries. I read a stat today that in a combined 54 appearances in all competitions made by Dwight Gale, Joe Linton and Andy Carroll, they've amassed this season only 5 goals, which is slightly worrying. So, Rob, coming to you first on this, can we trust these 3 with the survival of Newcastle this season whilst our other 3 are out injured?
It seems like a big ask, doesn't it? Dwight Gale was a great player for Newcastle in the Championship, but hasn't managed to replicate that kind of form in the Premier League. And that happens with some players. They're great at the second tier and not so strong when they move up. And we've seen that countless times before. Joe Linton is a huge disappointment, I think, for everyone, sadly, given the money they spent and the hopes that came with him. And obviously Andy Carroll is not the player he was during his Newcastle pomp. Injuries have taken their toll, and it's maybe the style of player he is doesn't necessarily suit the way Newcastle have set up this year. So that maybe is the big question, is how do Newcastle set up without Wilson, Saint-Maximin and Almiron? Do they play 2 up top, and maybe Carroll is one of them? They can stick the ball in the box and hope he gets his head on it and causes some chaos, which he's capable of doing. He did play well against Arsenal, but they didn't really put anything into the box for him. Most of his work was defensive. You mentioned Gale and Joe Linton. Do you start looking at other ways to score? Do we start talking about set pieces? In which case, you then start talking about people like Matt Ritchie being involved. And again, you come back to formation. How do you fit him in? But we've not been great from set pieces. John Joe Shelby's been quite guilty of that this year. We've had a lot of free kicks gone over the bar or wide. Corners not beating the first man. And Ryan Fraser's been guilty of that too. So there's all these things that factor in at a time when, we need offense. We need to score goals. We need to win upcoming games against West Brom and Brighton and these teams immediately around us. And there's no clear answer, partly because we don't know how Newcastle are going to set up without those 3. They could stick with the same formation, and you can kind of in your head work it out with Atsu playing and Fraser, and you could say, well, we could play the same way and hope for the best. But equally, given the way Bruce has fallen back on a back 5 in the past, you wouldn't be surprised if they did so again because of those lack of options. And they say, right, we'll stick 5 at the back and we'll hope for some kind of lucky break or something from a set piece, to win these games. And frankly, I don't think a lot of people would care if they did steal a victory right now. They just want the 3 points. So he could be forgiven for doing that. But whether we can actually do that is a very different matter.
So, Adam, with all that Rob has just said there in terms of various formations, various people possibly starting, if you were the manager come this weekend, what formation and what lineup and what choices would you make?
I think we need to go right back to basics, playing against West Brom, who we know are a big side, managed by Sam Allardyce. We know what they're probably going to do, and I think we need to just play Andy Carroll up front and play to his strengths, get balls into the box. We've seen that from Fraser. He's a good winger. He looks up into the box and he tries to get it in straight away. So I think we need to play to Carroll's strength, and then maybe having Gale just off him to offer that pace to keep defenders on their toes. But we're our own worst enemies, really, in the way that we've gone about things this season up front. I think we knew when we signed Callum Wilson, fantastic buy, but we needed depth there. We needed to bring in another frontline player. If we cast our minds back to when in that last couple of months under Rafa, we had Rondon and Perez, both went that season. Joe Linton comes in and he's just not up to it. And I often think, what do opposition teams think when they see our starting 11, particularly defenders? What are they thinking? Who's going to threaten us? And they probably look at the 11 now that might start on Sunday and think, I'm not really worried about any of these players. Although, having said that, I think having Carroll up front, using his elbows, getting involved, getting amongst the defenders will be a threat for us. The other question is, can he last the full 90 minutes? But again, I think we in terms of our rotation policy up front, I mean, Gale came on against West Brom, scored a fantastic goal, but then wasn't really seen again until Chelsea when he's put out on the right-hand side and he's thrown back in, taken out again. We haven't done ourselves any favours to kind of create depth in the squad for the eventual possibility that Wilson could have got injured, which has been proven. So go into Sunday's game thinking, on paper we should be favourites, but I'm very doubtful and very nervous in what is a must-win game for us on Sunday.
Stephen, Adam's mentioned Gale there, he's mentioned Carroll there. Would you start both of them together, maybe? Because I've heard a lot of shouts for that as well.
It is a possibility. With the option of Gale playing off Carroll, it could definitely work if you're providing good quality long balls into Carroll from the get down, from the hold up and bring Gale into play. I think set pieces will be key. I know we haven't been great with those this season, but I think if we put enough work in on the training ground, hopefully, and you've got the likes of Clark, Lascelles, who are also going to be good on corners. We could be a threat from those. And you'll have Carroll in there as well. I think, especially against a team like West Brom, who are physical, if we can get those people in and around the box and compete for headers on corners and free kicks, then I think that's going to help us quite a lot. In open play, Gale needs to be making runs beyond the defenders, doesn't he? As soon as that ball gets come forward to Carroll, he needs to just be taking the gamble if he is starting on Sunday. Because I know Gale wasn't great his first season in the Premier League after we got promoted. I think he only scored 6 goals or something like that in the whole season, compared to, 24, 25 in the Championship. We were clamouring from the start in the Premier League. We're really looking forward to it, and he just didn't reach the heights. So we kind of hope that was, in terms of his Premier League record, a slight blip. But for me, it's looking really bleak. I really don't know where the goals are going to come from, if I'm honest. Just purely going off their records this season. Carl started 4 games. He's had opportunities to put the ball in the net, especially against that game against Arsenal, which you mentioned. He missed 2 sitters during that game. That's something we didn't see in his first spell at Newcastle. So my faith in him's dwindled a little bit. But, if there's plenty of fight, if there's plenty of spirit in the lads, games against West Brom are games we should be winning. Hopefully we can ride it together and come through it with 3 points. But who knows? I'm not hopeful anyway.
Just to combine a kind of a couple of points that Stephen and Adam made. Stephen said it's almost a typical Sam Allardyce team at this point, West Brom. They're organised at the back. They're quite good from set pieces. There's not a huge amount of skill there, which has been their problem all season and was always going to make it difficult for them in the Premier League. But as I said, Allardyce has come in, trying to organise at the back and hit on set pieces. But as Adam said, Andy Carroll is almost the perfect counter to that for Newcastle, because he's big. He can put an elbow in, to use Adam's term. He can disrupt that defensive organisation, maybe for lack of a better word. He can give Newcastle something a bit different. And Stephen's right, he did miss a couple of great chances against Arsenal, but sometimes that happens when guys haven't been playing regularly, and they're suddenly asked to spearhead or be the lone striker for a team which is struggling for form and goals. So, it is a concern. But as I said, he, to me, at least on paper, is the kind of guy that can disrupt what has become quite a well-organised West Brom team. For all their lack of natural technical ability, they are organised. They are going to be hard to break down. So if you've got someone who can, I think, cause a bit of chaos, to go back to what I said before, I feel like we should probably use him. If it's not now, then when?
I think it showed at the weekend that West Brom will give you chances, though. Against Brighton, they conceded so many chances and were very fortunate to win that game still. So if we can rough them up a little bit at the back, I don't see why we can't get the goals. Despite the stat that I provided at the start of this topic, if Andy Carroll gets in amongst them, I'm sure he'll get on the end of something. If a quality ball is whipped into the box, Andy Carroll will always get his head on it somehow. Adam, I think you had something to say there.
Yeah, watching that sort of West Brom Brighton game at the weekend, you see there at the end two teams who are desperate for points, and they pile men into the box to try and get on the end of something. They have 5-6 players in the box, I think, at the end there, and Brighton trying to just get on the end of something. We don't do that enough. And I remember during the Man United game, Kieran Clark from a set piece rose above Harry Maguire, nodded it back across the box, and there was not one other black and white shirt, or we may have been playing in a luminous green that night, I can't quite remember, in the box. No one was busting a gut to get on the end of that. I think Joe Linton was somewhere, or maybe back on the halfway line or something. It would be nice to see players absolutely busting a gut to get in that box, cause problems. We've mentioned there, Carroll could be the man to do that, but we need others as well getting in and amongst as well.
That's been a problem all year. Sorry to cut in. That's been a problem all year. Getting people aggressively attacking the 6-yard box has been a problem. Wilson did it at the start of the year, then he tailed off. He started doing it again, then he got injured, and we're back to square one. The Clark header was the perfect example of that. People aren't attacking the box aggressively. They're not covering the fullbacks either. It's two problems we've had for most of the year, sadly.
Stephen, I think you wanted to say something, yeah?
Yeah, I think just that a positive to sort of counteract what I was saying before. If you've got Gale and Carroll on the pitch at the same time, when we're defending set pieces, Carroll's going to come back and help us defend as well, which is the opposite of what I've said before about him attacking on set pieces. He can get back, he can help the defence, which could be a positive as well, because then he can leave Gale on the halfway line. We know he's got some pace. If we win the ball on a corner or a set piece, we can pump the ball forward over the defence. He's got the pace to get in behind, and Carroll can come back and be that extra guy in defence. So having those two on the pitch does have its advantages. It's not all doom and gloom. I just worry about their record this season and how many goals they score between them. It doesn't give us a lot of hope, unfortunately.
Tonight, just in this chat so far, though, we've mentioned a lot of Carroll, we've mentioned a lot of Dwight Gale, but we haven't really mentioned Joe Linton. So I'm presuming, are we all of the three opinions that he shouldn't be in the start lineup on Sunday?
He shouldn't, but he might well be, just because of the price tag. I feel like Newcastle play him sometimes because he's their £40 million man, rightly or wrongly. That's kind of how I feel at this point about Joe Linton.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think it's how long do you give him before something? We keep kind of thinking something's going to happen with him. He's going to burst into life and start, banging them in. But it's how long now? I mean, what's it been? Nearly, 2 full seasons. But there's potential there. You see him. He sometimes holds the ball up, backs into people. There's a player in there, but it's just such a shame. He just, as I was saying earlier on, doesn't seem to have that desperation, that desire to score. Like, when Shearer would throw people out of the way to get on the end of something. He just doesn't have that. Wearing the number 9, we need that player who's gonna score goals, and he's just not, doesn't seem to be up to it.
I think he flatters to deceive.
Honestly, he wants too much time on the ball as well, and you don't get that in the Premier League.
Yeah,
you don't get a second to think about what to do next. You've got to. I remember we were talking about Kabay recently on the last Writers' Block. He knew what he was going to do before he got the ball, and that's what you need to be in the Premier League. You need to be instinctive. You need to be thinking about, before I get this ball, where's it going to go? Who am I going to try and play? And who am I going to lay off? Am I going to shoot? I'm on the edge of the box. He doesn't have any of that. He doesn't have any natural instinct, which is why he was probably suited to his last club, where he had more time on the ball. He probably looked a bit better than I think he was. And it's not, we've always said it, it's not his fault that he cost 40 million. None of that's his fault. Unfortunately, because he did cost 40 million, I think there could be some pressure from the owners saying he has to play. We've paid a lot of money for him. He has to feature in the team.
Just out of interest, do you think if he was being managed at Newcastle by a different manager, things would be different? Just to put that out there. Do you think it's maybe the way Steve Bruce has had him playing or not, or do you think it's just the way he is as a player in general? Rob,
I think it might depend on the manager a little bit, and how strong maybe they are. We're speculating whether there's some kind of message coming from the top saying we need to play this guy. We've paid all this money for him. We need him to be some kind of part of the team success, whatever word you want to use. This is the biggest investment we've ever made as a club in a single player. We've given him the number 9 shirt. They built him up last season as the solution to the striker problems, and he was never that kind of player. He was wrongly billed from the start, and that doesn't help anybody. But as I said, I think he does flatter to deceive. The Man United game's a perfect example. There was a beautiful layoff for Almiron in our end to set Miggy off. There was another time when nice little turn and spin out by the touchline, and he basically took 2 United players out of the game, but then he doesn't know what to do with the ball after that, as Stephen alluded to. There's no, the final ball, there's one too many touches. Right at the start of the game, he got in the box and he took 3-4 touches. And I don't know if he was confused by how much space he'd had, but he ended up just clattering a shot into, I think it was Harry Maguire's legs, when really that was the chance just to pop a quick one on goal, catch De Gea cold early. De Gea's a good goalie. He probably would have saved it, but, at least then you'd say, look, we can get shots away, we can get to these guys. But instead, it was a wasted opportunity early in an away game that Newcastle needed a confidence boost almost. It's Old Trafford, don't have a great record there, even at the best of times. But, I don't know if he's just not suited to the Premier League, as Stephen alluded to, and he just managed better in the Bundesliga. He keeps having problems with his hip. It could be a bit of everything, but at this point, I don't know what else you do other than just say, look, it's not working, and we can't afford to be carrying him at this stage of the season in the position we're in the Premier League.
You make some very good points there, yeah, Rob. Hopefully, though, regardless of whatever we've said tonight, that we get the 3 points on Saturday. I think it's imperative that we do. And one of these players that we've talked about does fill in and does get some of the goals. Moving on now to the very sad news this week of the death of former Newcastle captain, player, manager, Glenn Roeder. Glenn Roeder was someone who was a massive contributor towards Newcastle United during his career. And since his passing this week, numerous tributes have flooded in all over social media and all from around the football world. Adam, how would you summarise his contribution to Newcastle United?
Yeah, it's really sad news this week, and I think one thing that's really stood out for me in the tributes that have been paid to Glenn Roeder this week is people who played with him, people who interviewed him when he was manager of Newcastle have said he was just a great man, and that's what comes first before they then mention his abilities as a player and his abilities as a manager. He was just a great man, and he was someone who made you very proud to support your football club, and he was in that category, of Keegan, Robson, Benitez, a manager, a figurehead who made you really proud to support the support Newcastle United. And I think when he came in as well, we had Graham Souness as manager, who was sacked in February 2006, and things had really gone wrong under Souness. Souness had dismantled that entertaining Robson squad. He'd fallen out, I think, a lot of the players. Bellamy had gone. There was then the Bowyer and Dyer incident, the fighting on the pitch the season before, which he didn't handle particularly well as manager. And I think as fans, we sort of lost a bit of interest under Souness, and Roeder came in and as I mentioned, made you just really proud and made you believe again. And that run we went on under Roeder, I think we were in 15th place, and we won. I think we gained something like 32 points from the remaining 15 games or something. And he made you believe again. And I was actually at first year at uni at the time, enjoying myself. And to watch Newcastle United go on this fantastic run was brilliant. And of course, in that as well, we beat Sunderland 4-1 at the Stadium of Light, the last time that we won there. Alan Shearer's last game. And Roeder was also a manager for, I think, Roeder's first game in charge was when Shearer broke the goal scoring record as well. So we've got great memories of Glenn Roeder's time as manager. It went a bit awry the season after. I think he wasn't really backed in that summer. I think we brought in Obafemi Martins, who was good on his day, but not really an out-and-out Newcastle number 9. And Damien Duff as well, who at that point in time had a number of injuries and was past his best. And the season after, we didn't do as well. But I think there was things going on behind the scenes then. Talk of Ashley coming in, talk of the ownership sort of selling up, moving on, and so perhaps he wasn't backed. But a great man, and as I mentioned there at the start, that's what people remember of him. Someone who made you proud to support your football club, the way he held himself, the way he was very calm and composed, and would be sadly missed.
Certainly will be. Of course, as a player for Newcastle as well in the 80s, a captain. Rob, do you have any memories of that?
I don't as a player. I'm a little bit too young for that one, but it strikes me that one of the other things that a lot of people have said is he was somebody who wasn't from Newcastle but understood Newcastle fans. And obviously, I'm not from Newcastle. The accent probably gives that away. But it strikes me that he obviously spent time playing there. So, you do kind of, if you're on the pitch, you hear what's being said. And I'm reluctant to draw the comparison to Keegan, but obviously they both were players at Newcastle before they became managers. And I wonder if that plays into it, having been on the pitch and felt the atmosphere. When you then come back as manager, what's going to go on around you a little bit. But as Adam alluded to, he came in at a difficult time in Newcastle's history. Obviously, Freddie Shepherd was not popular, and his win percentage is actually pretty good. I think it's like the 5th highest in team history among permanent managers. Certainly in the modern era, there's obviously Keegan and Chris Hughton, who I don't play anything down, but they both obviously had seasons in Division 1 or the Championship, which probably didn't hurt their winning record. To come in at a time like that there was a lot of injury trouble, as Adam alluded to, and to put in some pretty decent performances and steady the ship. That's quite an impressive effort. I know a lot of people feel like he was hard done by being released when he was. I know, obviously, Newcastle went after Allardyce, who just come off a successful spell with Bolton, and maybe Roeder was just not seen as the future where Allardyce was back then. I know things have panned out differently for him and Newcastle since. But there are a lot of people who feel Glenn Roeder was hard done by being released when he was, especially considering what he had done with the resources he had available, the injuries he had to coach through, and he guided Newcastle to the Intertoto Cup. I know most people don't think about that, but that is something that's tangible that we haven't had for years, since Keegan left, really. That we've reached a couple of FA Cup finals, but this is actually a tangible thing to say, look, it's not a great big thing to crow about, but we haven't had a lot to crow about in general for 25 years. So it's not to be sniffed at, I don't think.
Stephen, obviously, we've had a lot of memories here about Glenn Roeder, a lot of positives. Do you have any stand-up memories or thoughts about the man?
Well, a couple of memories. Me and my parents, my family, we used to call him the Demon Headmaster, because whenever he was interviewed on TV, he was so he hardly cracked a smile, but he carried himself so well, and you just got the impression that in the dressing room everything was strict, everything was disciplined. So yeah, we used to call him the Demon Headmaster. A couple of games that I was remembering over the weekend was the most famous one, I think, was the 3-2 against Tottenham, when Martin scored that absolute belter from outside the box. It was a White Hart Lane. We're getting beat 2-1. I think Martin scored the second and Nicky Butt scored the last, which was quite a memorable game. I remember watching that on TV, actually. It was brilliant. And I was at the 2-1 against Liverpool at St James's Park. Nobby Solano scored a penalty to win us the game. So those are two sort of favourite matches that I remember Glenn Roeder was manager of. He's just a really likeable person. He never really spoke a word out of turn. He always answered his questions intelligently. And you always felt like you had control of things, even if we had a couple of bad results. You sort of made you feel like it was going to be okay. We'll find some form from somewhere. And like the lads were saying, we were in a terrible place before we come. We were staring at relegation, and I think it carried us to 7th in the league. So I mean that's a pretty impressive thing to do. With a side that we've been picked to go down, just to climb us back out of that position and get like Rob was saying, get us into the European Cup final as well. I mean, I know it's only the Intertoto Cup, but we haven't won a trophy since the 60s, I think. So that in itself, for me, is a pretty good achievement. I don't care what trophy it is. We still won us something. So yeah, there's some good memories, some really good memories, and it was sad, very, very sad to learn that he passed away at the weekend.
I think as a player as well, especially for those a bit older than maybe ourselves, as a centre-back and a defender, he was really quite ahead of his time. Some of the things that he did on the ball, known as like the Roeder shuffle, for example, the step over that he did, unbelievable. And yeah, it just summarises that as a player and a manager, he was really one of the good guys in football, and he will be sorely missed. I don't know, does anyone else have anything to say about Glenn Roeder? Of course, true faith, just before I do let everyone say, true faith with their latest issue, have dedicated the front page to, and the front cover, I should say, to Glenn Roeder, and it's a fantastic image. So please do go and have a look at that, purchase that if you get the chance. Anyone else have anything to say about the man just before we move on?
Yeah, just to add to what you were saying there, Daniel, about him as a player. I wasn't around at the time when he was playing for Newcastle, but I've read a couple of articles, and I think True Faith historian Mark Corby's written a few articles about where the club was at the end of the 1980s, and it wasn't a great place, Newcastle, I think, in that decade. And we had some young stars coming through who sort of quickly moved on. I think Gaza, Beasley was sold, but Roeder was that sort of consistent, calm figurehead, at the back, controlling things and kind of steadying the ship when there was sort of trouble behind the scenes. And that certainly came across as well, as I mentioned earlier, when he was manager, someone you could, trust and have faith in. And we know we've not had in recent years managers who you put into that category. So, you'd class Roeder in that category of the Keegan and the Robson and the Benitez as someone who made you really proud to support your football club.
Yeah, well said.
No, I fully agree. I think, as I say, I can remember a bit of his time as manager. Certainly, I'm not old enough to remember him as a player, but I can certainly remember games such as the 4-1 away at the Stadium of Light. That I was rather young at that point, but yeah, it great memories, and he will be sorely missed. Our final topic tonight concerns the media potentially writing off players too early. A prime example of this could be John Stones, who admittedly made a few errors in his career at times and was badly slated by a lot of the press for all these things. However, this season he's had a bit of a renaissance. So is it right that players are written off or slated so much by the media? Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
I think sometimes, this question could be flipped, in my opinion. I think sometimes the media hype players up too much and sort of put them on a pedestal. So when they don't perform, say they might have like one great season where, I allude to Adama Traore for Wolves. He had a fantastic season like last season and maybe the season before, and he's doing it now. And a few pundits, a few people in the media are starting to get on his back. So I think they can sort of be raised up to be this fantastic thing far too quickly. The expectations are too high. The pressure's put on these players so that when they do have a different form, the media is straight away on their back. And like John Stones, for instance, yeah, he had a different form, but he's still a great footballer. It doesn't mean that form isn't going to come back. I think it just makes for like, it's almost like clickbait, isn't it, when they start having to go at these players and they start, saying, is his time finished? Should he move on from Man City in the case of John Stones? And like I was saying, Traore, his form's dipped. There's a few people saying that he could move on from Wolves. And I just think that, some players have 6 months, 7 months where they're playing absolutely fantastic. And as soon as they have a bad game or bad 2 games, the media straight away, like I say, they're trying to write them off. I think the fans can be quite guilty of this as well. I think us as football fans, we can be very guilty of this. We get, for instance, at Newcastle, you look at like Saint Maximin, who has got a lot of potential. He's very talented. But as soon as he has a bad 45 minutes, or if he doesn't turn up for one game, I've seen on Twitter, people have been asking questions of him. Some of the fans have been very critical of him at times. He's our most creative outlet. He's probably our best player on his day, and he still gets quite a bit of stick from some of the fans. So I do think we're guilty of it ourselves as well. The expectations become far too high at times for players who sometimes maybe just, I'm not saying St. Maximin's average, but you look at some players and maybe they are just average and they've had like a spell of 6 months where they've been overachieving, so that when they do start performing at their level, like people just start writing them off because they haven't been doing as well as they were previously. So I think, in my opinion, that for me that's the case. I think they sort of build up to be more than what they actually are.
No, I would agree with you there, Stephen. I certainly think players can be overhyped a bit at first as well, which then when they suddenly aren't playing the way that they once were, they then get absolutely slated. Adam, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with the statement, and I think it's a problem with the British media, the media in this country in general, the desire they seem to have to whip up a lot of negativity around certain players, question the things that they're up to in their private life, try and sort of get that sort of sports news on the front page of newspapers for the wrong reason. And I know, Rob, you wrote an article this week about pundits and about the negativity that we get sort of given towards us as Newcastle fans. And I think a lot of it is these pundits wanting to further their own careers. So what can they say that's slightly controversial that's going to get, as Stephen said, the clickbait is going to get them in the limelight. And I think we had some comments from Peter Crouch this week that irritated us as Newcastle fans. But it's definitely an issue, I think, in this country, and it's been coming out a lot recently. And we talked on the last the Writers' Block two episodes ago about Twitter and about some of the comments that were put out directed towards Mike Riley, had been directed towards Steve Bruce. And the way the media sort of goes on in this country, it does whip up a lot of negativity, a lot of hatred, and with social media now as well, people think they have the right to sort of criticize and say negative things without actually seeing a fairer, more sort of rounded debate about things, and being able to discuss things sort of intellectually and have an interesting debate and open themselves up to criticism as well. And I don't want to steal Rob's thunder there about his article, but one thing I was just going to say about the Crouch thing was, he said, came out in the media and said there's been a lot of hysteria. Fine, that's his opinion, but why doesn't he look at why that is? If that's what he thinks, why doesn't he dig a little deeper and look at let's go back, let's look at some facts, let's kind of try and understand why that is, rather than just sort of say something to try and sort of whip up that negative reaction. But unfortunately, to sort of go back to the point, I think that's what the press does, just to try and draw attention towards what's being said.
No, I agree with you there as well, Adam. Rob, I'll come to you because, of course, you wrote an article on this matter. So please go for it. Say what you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, the article I wrote was more about the difficulty that pundits and media coverage tends to have, that there's this relentless tide of football right now where people Jermaine Jenas was the one I centred on because a lot of people were angry with what he said after the Newcastle Man United game. And it basically centred on the fact that he'd bounced from game to game to game to game. And it's almost inevitable that pundits aren't going to know the nuances of what's going on at given teams. And it's stripped out that kind of in-depth knowledge. But sort of back on topic for what we were talking about, I think Stephen struck on an extremely important point. It's not just media. There is a fan element to this as well, because, and again, this ties in with what Adam said about social media. Narratives start to gain traction, they start to get a groundswell. But I think the bigger point is, and this is partly multifaceted, is the way we assess players and sometimes reassess players. John Stones, you mentioned at the top of this segment, people had started to look at him differently. But now, as soon as he's partnered with Ruben Diaz, a new central partnership at City, and they're flying, and people think differently about him again, because sometimes partnerships just don't work. And for whatever reason, whoever he was combined with previously just didn't quite click. Whereas with Ruben Diaz, brilliant, great, best pairing in the league. Diaz, it might even be with a shout of Player of the Year, which probably doesn't hurt Stones. But as I alluded to, there's more to it, because in the sort of pre-show chat, we talked about Gareth Bale as well. He's had a couple of good games, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is Gareth Bale back again. I don't know about that, because the Gareth Bale we talk about is the one who played for Spurs 5-6 years ago, and we think of the guy who's helping Real Madrid win Champions Leagues. He's not that Gareth Bale. He's a bit older. He's had a few injuries. He didn't have a lot of playing time towards the end in Madrid either. And obviously, it's only recently he started to see more for Spurs. So I'm not saying he's a bad player. That is patently not true. But he's not the Gareth Bale from X years ago. And I think that was part of the problem that again, Stephen touched on, is how people are hyped up. It's like Gareth Bale back to Spurs. It's not the same Gareth Bale. He's still a good player. He's still got something to contribute, but people expecting him to be the same guy he was when he left, White Hart Lane as it was then. They were in for a rude awakening. And I think maybe this also touches on how we assess players based on the team they play for. And I'm going to use Jesse Lingard as an example here. People didn't think he'd worked out at Manchester United. That's probably fair. He didn't necessarily kick on, but he's doing really well for West Ham right now. So just because a player maybe isn't quite good enough for one of the big six or one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the Premier League in a given season, doesn't mean he can't help another team succeed. And his arrival in January has really helped West Ham maintain their challenge for a Champions League spot. I never thought we'd be saying that at the start of the season. So it's the way we assess collectively. I think there is definitely a media element because it's a 24-hour news cycle. That doesn't help. It never helps with any of these things, whether we're talking about the stuff Adam alluded to with pundits saying sensational things or comments being taken out of context. But equally, it's to do with the assessment and reassessment, which we're just not very good at it sometimes. And we don't take the step back that we need to, because it's football is relentless, especially right now with fans locked out and games every night. There needs to sometimes be a step back and look and say, look, this isn't the player he was 5 years ago, or this has happened or that has happened. That needs to be taken into account, and it's not always being taken into account.
I fully agree with you there, Rob. I think as well, there's often a lot of negative media coverage around the England team. I think before every major tournament, they're very much built up, and then if they have one little slip up, they're pretty much put in the bin. And I think that often really damages England's hopes and has done for this various major tournaments that we've been in, potentially being part of a reason why we haven't won anything for so long. Adam, do you have any thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think, as I mentioned before, the press in the past, when England have had a bad tournament, have transferred that all onto the sort of the front pages. And I think there's been a few famous incidents of England managers being sort of really hung out to dry, and the press, our own Sir Bobby Robson, was given a really difficult time during World Cup 1990. And again, it goes back to what I was saying. We do have an issue within this country, I think, with the media, with the press, the way that they go after people, the way that they damage people's lives. And I think it's the same, as I say, if a footballer has a slip up or is caught. I know there were a couple of cases recently, and rightly so. Footballers were chastised for breaking COVID regulations. But in the past, when there've been inquiries into footballers' private lives, it's been splashed all over the front pages of newspapers. The media seem to enjoy going after people, and I think it is just an issue we have in this country with the media, and it does manifest itself as well in the way that people, I think, use Twitter and the comments that they make online.
Yeah, I agree once again. Stephen, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think once one part of the media or one section of the media start a narrative, they all pick it up and they all start peddling it as much as they can, and it sort of puts that mindset into us as fans, so then we start projecting that as well. A lot of people believe what they read. A lot of people think that what they read in the newspapers or what they hear on TV, it's got to be right. These people are paid to have these opinions, so surely they must be saying the right thing. When, matter of fact, it's probably quite the opposite. One player I feel sorry for this season as well is Timo Werner, who I think's been beaten with a pretty harsh stick. He hasn't hit the ground running for Chelsea. He's struggled. But if you look at his record at, is it Leverkusen? Sorry, not Leverkusen.
Leipzig.
He scored like 27, 28 goals last season. I know the Bundesliga is a totally different league. As I said before, it's a lot slower. You get a lot more time on the ball. Defending's a lot weaker in their league, but you still could have put that ball in the net. He's still a very good striker, and I very much expect that even next season. I think we'll be getting double figures goals next season, without a doubt. And then the narrative will probably change on him. The media will start picking him up. They'll start saying what a great player he actually is, as opposed to this season. Saying that Chelsea is wasting money on him. Can people get the best out of him? Is he really the player that they thought he was? Definitely is. And that's, it doesn't just happen for the team of Roeder, it happens for so many players. We've seen it in Newcastle so many times over the years. And part of it is, like Rob said in his article, some of these pundits and people in the media don't get enough time to research different clubs or look at certain players. They might watch them for one game and then that's it, their mind's made up. He's rubbish, he didn't score today. When in fact, sometimes you don't see what the player's doing off the ball or what the player's doing, or even hear about what the player's doing in dressing rooms. I remember Shola Amiobi for years and years, he got we got such a raw deal at Newcastle, but you heard stories about how effective he was in the changing room, how brilliant he was on the training ground. He boosted morale, and you don't hear about that so much in the media. All you hear is he's not scoring goals, he's not a very good footballer, and then that feeds into everyone who's sort of reading the newspapers or listening to Sky Sports. Yeah, they must be right. They're getting paid to say those things, so they must be right.
Rob, coming to you next on this.
I think we've kind of focused on the British media, but I think some of this does happen abroad as well. I think in Spain, certainly with Barcelona and Real Madrid, some of their guys get some stick. I know it's probably that we see it more, and maybe it is something that is more prominent in Britain, shall we say. I mean, one of my earliest footballing memories is Graham Taylor reimagined as a turnip on the back page of a well-known rag. But, Stephen mentioned Timo Werner there. I mean, again, that's the kind of thing that's just gone on, even for players who've succeeded. Fabrizio Ravanelli at Middlesbrough had such a torrid time in the British media. After he'd left, he refused to speak to people like James Richardson, who, when they were doing Football Italia and covering Italian football, saying he wouldn't speak to the British press anymore. He was reputedly polite about it, but it's a polite go away. I'm not talking to the British press anymore. So even people who've done relatively well, if there's a hook for them to try and latch onto, Werner struggling it just opens the door. And it's such a strange, as I say, part of it is 24-hour news cycle. I think at the moment, Sky Sports News is running 24 hours, Talk Sport, and things like that. So they've got to fill time with something, anything. And in some cases, it contradicts something they said an hour ago or 2 days ago. And I know some Newcastle fans are upset with the way people like Simon Jordan talk about Newcastle compared to other clubs in not dissimilar situations. And it's this sort of strange environment which almost perpetuates itself, unfortunately. We can't seem to break that cycle, and I don't know that we ever will, because it keeps generating clicks and selling newspapers.
Spot on there, Rob. Very true. Well, lads, I think that wraps things up for tonight. We've joined on a little bit now. Thank you all three for being part of it once again.
Cheers.
Pleasure.
Just a quick reminder, once again, as I mentioned at the start of the video, if you do want to get involved with True Faith, be a part of it, head to Twitter and head to @TFNUFC and get in touch. All that leaves me to say is thank you all very much for watching at home. Please like, subscribe to True Faith, and also have a look at their new fanzine issue, which is out now. Thank you all very much for watching, and goodbye.